Okay, so we're finally getting into the real biology stuff. So, Section 3, Studying Life. Basically, you're going to learn about what we're going to learn about this year. So, characteristics that all living things share. All made of cells, based on a universal genetic code. They obtain and use materials and energy, they grow and develop, they reproduce, they respond to their environment, they maintain a stable internal environment, and they change over time. Don't try to write that all down now because we're going to talk about each of those things individually. So, biology. If you haven't caught on to this yet, biology is the study of life. But how do you know if something's alive or not? So, there's not one characteristic that's going to be able to describe a living thing. There's a bunch of things that they all share. Some things might have some of those traits, but not all of them. Like a virus, they have some of the traits of living things, but not all of them. So, yes, there's some gray area there, but for the most part, we can list the things that all living things have in common. So, first of all, they're all based on a universal genetic code. If it's alive, it has DNA. If it doesn't have DNA, it's not alive. But all of our DNA is the same. Every person, every animal, every plant, every fungus, every bacteria. And that's all going to be passed from parent to offspring and on and on. Living things grow and develop. So we all start out from a single fertilized egg. It grows and divides over and over again, turns into a totally different form. And they also differentiate. So some cells have different functions than others. Living things respond to their environment. So a stimulus, a signal to which an organism responds. If um, if you turn off the lights in my house at night, my 4-year-old will scream. So the lights turning off is a stimulus, her screaming is her response. And my slide does not want to go. There we go. Okay, so living things reproduce. So they make new organisms. Those new organisms are usually pretty similar to the original organisms. So in most cases, plants and animals have sexual reproduction. So two parents form a new organism. And other things reproduce through asexual reproduction. So one organism produces an offspring that's identical to itself. We can go out to the greenhouse most of the time during the spring, taking a cutting off a plant, grow a new plant that's exactly identical to the original plant. Living things maintain a relatively stable internal environment, even when external conditions change dramatically. So that's called homeostasis. Uh, Usually, living things have to use energy to keep that happening, but it's very important. If the pH of our blood changes a lot, if the amount of oxygen in our blood changes a lot, if the temperature in our blood changes a lot, it's going to be a big problem. Probably going to be in a hospital or dead. We don't want that to happen. So our body is set up to make sure those things, for the most part, stay in the range they're supposed to be. Living things obtain and use material and energy to grow, develop, and reproduce. So basically, we eat and use what we eat. So the combination of chemical reactions which an organism builds up or breaks down materials is metabolism. People usually think about metabolism as how fast you're burning calories, but metabolism also refers to building things up inside your body or inside of any cell. Living things are made of one or more cells. So the smallest a living thing can be is one cell. Obviously, most things other than bacteria are a lot more than that. Cells can grow, respond to their surroundings, and reproduce. So one cell can be something that's living. Even though they're small, they're pretty complex, highly organized. Living things change over time or evolve. We have a whole chapter over this later. Yes, some of you are probably saying, I believe in God, I don't believe in evolution. I'll explain this in much greater detail when we get to that chapter, but It doesn't have to be that way. Evolution means change over time. If you don't believe that things change, you're delusional. But again, we'll talk about that a lot more in chapter 17. Again, evidence of things changing, fossils, DNA. All right, so the big ideas of biology. A bunch of ideas that are all linked together, but basically, this is what you're going to learn in biology. So, the cellular basis of life, information and heredity, matter and energy, growth, development, and reproduction, homeostasis, evolution, structure and function, unity and diversity of life, interdependence in nature, and science as a way of knowing. So, again, all these things tie together. The cellular basis of life, we talked about earlier, living things are made of cells. Some things are just one cell, they're unicellular. Other things are multicellular, or more than one cell. Again, the universal genetic code. What's in your DNA is controlling what happens in your body. Matter and energy. I used to spend a lot of time on this because people couldn't seem to comprehend the difference between matter and energy. But we don't have time for that anymore. So, matter, any physical thing. Obviously, we need matter, and usually that matter that we're taking in involves getting energy. The energy is stored inside the chemical bonds of the matter. So we have to have the matter to get the energy, basically. We can't just take it in from the sun like a plant. All living things reproduce. We already talked about that. Homeostasis, again, stable internal environments. Evolution, all living things change. It looks pretty likely that we all have a common ancestor a really, really long time ago. Structure and function. This is more advanced biology, just because. Anyway, so there's just not enough time in 1 year to learn everything in biology. So, structure and function, if you take advanced biology, you'll learn more about that. We'll talk about it a little bit at the end of the year when we do dissections. Unity and diversity of life. Yes, there's a lot of things that are the same with all living things or with groups of living things, but there's a lot of differences too. Interdependence in nature. The biosphere is just all of the living parts of the planet. Anything where there's anything living is the biosphere. So within the biosphere, organisms are all linked to each other and to everything around them. And those relationships are going to depend on the cycling of matter and the flow of energy. So basically, food chains and food webs. Science is a way of knowing. We talked about this in section 1. Science uses observations, questions, and experiments to explain what's going on in the natural world, making predictions, figuring things out that make sense, not just making guesses. We can use that information to take action, things that affect us. Fields of biology. We're just going to skim through this really fast. It's not really something you need to be tested over so much. It's just kind of good to know, maybe something that you would be interested in your future. Global ecology. So studying the living things on Earth and the atmosphere and climate that they're living in. Obviously, we can learn how we and other organisms are affecting the whole environment. The example they give, an ecologist monitoring lichens in a forest to study the effects of air pollution on the health of that forest. Biotechnology. This is another class I teach. I teach specifically ag biotechnology, but most of that applies to biotechnology as a whole. So biotech is based on changing the genetic code. So we can do a lot of really cool things now, like put a gene in bacteria to do something beneficial for us, like make human insulin for diabetics. There's a lot of things we think we'll be able to do in the near future. But the thing with biotechnology is there's lots of ethical issues, social problems. Is this stuff okay? The tree of life. You guys have probably seen this before in a science class. Basically, it looks like a tree showing how every living thing is related. And my slide won't go again. Ecology and evolution of infectious diseases. This is a huge field. A lot of it is pretty government funded. But understanding how diseases work within the human population, um, the interactions with the environment, the medicines we take, it's kind of an interesting field. For example, studying pathogens in wild baboons that might affect humans. Genomics and molecular biology. Just in the past 20, 25 years, they've mapped entire genomes, all of the DNA in a human, all of the DNA in a cow, all of the DNA in a grasshopper. There's a lot of things now that we have the entire genetic code for. So they can use that information to figure out maybe what's causing a certain type of cancer or why certain people are getting certain diseases, things like that. The metric system in science, kind of changing pages here. Um, Anytime you're doing a science experiment, yeah, if it's just for the purposes of the 15, 20 people in this room, probably wouldn't be the end of the world if we used the English system. But in science as a whole, if this information is going out to a large group of people, everybody uses the metric system. Other than here in America, everybody in the world uses the metric system pretty much. Um, a lot more straightforward. Everything's based on multiples of 10. Hopefully, you've used the metric system enough in junior high, maybe even elementary school, that you kind of understand how this works. But this chart gives a lot of common measurements. A meter is 100 centimeters, 1,000 meters is a kilometer, a kilogram is 1,000 grams. So that chart's in your book if you ever need to look back at it. We won't spend a whole lot of time on measurements, but it's important things to understand. You don't want to be totally lost when somebody starts talking about something being 72 centimeters long and you have no clue how long that is. Again, the meter or any other measurement can be multiplied or divided to figure out mass and volume. Safety. There's not a whole lot in this class we're going to do that's dangerous. There's a few chemicals we work with. When we do dissections, we use scalpels, but for the most part, common sense will keep you pretty safe in here. Again, make sure you read lab directions carefully, follow my instructions so you don't do anything that might get you hurt. For the most part, as long as you wash your hands after the lab, you're probably going to be fine. Tomorrow we're going to do a lab with potatoes. They're very dangerous, tell you what. But you never know what could be on those potatoes. So when we're done with the lab, wash your hands. Pretty simple, right? Again, a lot of things in biology are organisms you can't see, bacteria, viruses. So you have to try to be safe about that. Again, we're not using anything terribly dangerous, but still try to keep yourself safe. Make sure you wash your hands, wear appropriate protective gear, depending on the lab we're doing. And that is the end, I guess.